Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Joy, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition of Focus on Liberia, the Liberia History Channel, we're going to be looking at the first citizens of the Republic of Liberia. Who are they? And prior to the show, I had a little puzzle here, or a little quiz saying who were the first citizens of Liberia? A, American Liberians only. B, American Liberians and Congo people. C, American Liberians, indigenous Liberians and Congo people. D, indigenous Liberians only. E, none of the above. Keep tuned, and we're going to bring you the answers right
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct.
All right, welcome back. This is Focus on Liberia, the Liberia History Channel. The presenter, of course, Call Family. Call, welcome to Focus on Liberia, the Liberia History Channel.
It's always my pleasure to be here, Dennis.
And Call, I must say, how's the weekend going?
Always going good. I mean, weekends are always relaxing for me. I don't do a whole lot. Just hang out with my husband, my children, read when I can, and now I'm doing this on Saturday, every Saturday. So,
thank you. We want to welcome all viewers from across the globe. Liberian history is not something that has really been taught in my country, Liberia, and so we are putting a lot of thoughts, a lot of work in this. We want to be grateful to all of you who continue to support us, who continue to watch this, and who continue to encourage us. We also want to say we are grateful to those who continue to give us feedback, some negative and sometimes me. But it is what we chose to do, and so welcome. Let's begin by, first citizens of Liberia.
yes.
Just by that, what does that even mean? Somebody will say.
Right. So the Liberia is, our story is unique. Our story is unique. And I think everything that we have talked about over the past few months has kind of brought us to this point. We've talked about the pattern of immigration. We've talked about recaptured Africans. We've talked about descendants of enslaved Africans in America. We've talked about indigenous Liberians who were incorporated early on through many different means, educated and baptized. We talked about, the larger territory that was not penetrated at independence and where people remained sovereign until the partitioning of Africa forced Liberia to be more, to affect more control over its territory, or risk having it lost to the British and the French. So we've talked about all of these themes, and every single episode of this show has addressed some aspect of this. Today, we're going to kind of bring everything home and kind of talk about in 1847, when that Declaration of Independence was penned by Hilary Teague, at that point, who were the citizens of the Republic of Liberia? And who were the people that resided in the territory who were not citizens? I'm sorry, Dennis, I'm not hearing you again.
Citizenship. I mean, even today, we continue to wrestle with that question of citizenship. Just recently, there's a new law signed about dual citizenship, or it is not really there as dual citizenship, but certain restrictions were removed to say, well, if you do X, Y, Z, you're a citizen of Liberia. So the question of citizenship, or what was the definition of citizenship at that time?
So basically, the only criteria to be a citizen was that you were Black, essentially a person of color, that you were not a European, and you were not a beneficiary of white supremacy and white imperialism. Liberia was established as an asylum for oppressed people of African descent, for oppressed Africans, essentially. And so this is important because the understanding was, and from the very inception of the country, if you remember, we talked about King Peter and his clan seeking refuge in the settlement in the very early stages of this republic establishing itself. I mean, this colony establishing itself. It served not only as a refuge for repatriated African Americans, but also for liberated, what we call Congo or recaptured Africans, people who had been unlawfully taken into the transatlantic slave trade, many of whom had not left the shores of West Africa, and liberated enslaved people that were physically present on Liberian, in the vicinity. For example, Trade-town in Bassa, when they conquered Trade-town and liberated Trade-town, there were hundreds of people who were being held in these factories in preparation to be sold across the Atlantic. These people were then incorporated, and they went through the process of baptism and incorporation. A lot of times people ask, well, why didn't they just go back home if they had been liberated? Why did they have to go and settle in the settlement? Well, the reason is it wouldn't, for a lot of people, it wasn't safe to return, or there was no home to return to. Yeah. So if you have been a victim of war,
Carl, let me stop you there.
Okay.
Because you kind of mentioned a few things that I want us to dig into even
Sure.
before we go further. You said Liberia was established as an asylum country.
Mm-hmm.
Says who?
Says those who established it, those who declared the independence. Says Hillary Teague. Says says the men that we discussed last week. So one of the things, if you watch the shows, I need people to really watch these shows in sequence because everything is connected. Last week, we discussed the Constitution and Declaration of Independence in great detail. And we talked about the purpose of not only breaking away and establishing this independent state, but in the words of the founders of the modern republic, it was being established as an asylum, as a safe haven for free people.
At what point, Carl, let's say in America, before the African Americans were deciding to come, or when the ACS came in, mm-hmm. Whose idea was it from the very inception that this is going to be an asylum country? Was it the ACS? Was it the American government? Was it the or descendants of the ex-slaves?
It was never meant to be a country. It was meant to be a place to dump people, almost like a reservation, kind of how we have Indian reservations. It's a place to get rid of people that they didn't want in their society and giving them a place to be, yet still being under somewhat the control or the stewardship of European people. When I say Europeans, I'm talking about those of European descent, including European Americans. So what ends up happening is, as we talked about last week, Hillary Teague, Elijah Johnson, and others demanded, in fact, from the very beginning of the colony, Hillary Teague was all about state building. He wanted to be independent. And they were able to convince enough people in the settlement to buy into this. I mean, even Maryland separately declared itself independent even before Liberia, the Commonwealth of Liberia did. But the idea of sovereignty was definitely birthed by the descendants of African people who had returned. It was not something that was imposed upon them, contrary to what is the narrative that people have continuously spun. Because if you even read the Constitution of the Commonwealth, there's nothing in there that resembles sovereignty. It's really just stewardship. Even the draft Constitution that Greenleaf wrote, even after they decided they were going to be independent, and Greenleaf drafted the Constitution, again, resembled almost exactly the Commonwealth Constitution, where there would still be stewardship. And these men said, no, we want freedom. We are men, and we are going to be self-determinant, and we're not children.
Right.
And that was definitely the idea of the founding fathers of the country.
But was that the mindset before they left the United States? Like, take someone like Paul Coffey. So, was it in their mind that we're going to Africa to establish a country, and this is going to be an asylum country? Was it part of their calculus when they were leaving the United States? I'm talking about the African.
Paul Coffey never articulated that he wanted to establish a country. So the concept of having a country, meaning a state, a country with a government, with sovereignty, with political sovereignty, in a modern sense, it's not that there were not countries or states in Africa, but when I say modern, I really mean Western sense, in the Western European concept of a modern state. Because, if it existed in modern times, at the time, it was also modern. So there were African states, very powerful African states that all of us know existed before, and even during this time. Dahomey was a state, and it was existing simultaneously at the time Liberia was being established. I mean, you had empires, you had kingdoms, you had governments, you had countries all over Africa. But the idea of establishing a Western-styled republic is unique to Liberia. And was unique to Liberia. So the settlement at Freetown was not established to create a republic. It was established to basically be a place to put people who had been liberated from captivity.
I'm quiet because I'm letting that to sink in.
Okay.
And then still, let's stay with the concept of asylum. Recapture Africans. Liberia, and you mentioned, I mean, if they were recaptured, why can't they go back, to where they came from?
Right, and this is a very good question. So a lot of times when people are captured into slavery, it is not a good situation. Most often, it was because of war and conquest. Someone would go, burn down your town, and take people and sell them into slavery. Or if you were an individual who somebody, maybe there were Sassywood trials. You have former slaves that would narrate that somebody put them through some kind of trial, accused them of sorcery, accused them of some bad deed, and this was a way to dispose of them. There were people sold into slavery to pay off debts, of other people. So if someone owed somebody something, some king owed something to another king and said, you know what, you can have some of my plantation servants and you can do with them what you will. And then these people would end up on the coast, in chains, being ready to be sold off. So if you're removed from your home in such a manner, this is not a place you can go to safely and not risk being resold into slavery, especially if you're a victim of war and someone raided your town or your home. So a lot of times it wasn't safe to return. And even those who were considered indigenous Liberians, I'm even just talking about recaptured Africans, indigenous Liberians who could have easily taken a 2 to 3 day journey through the rainforest and gone back to where they came from, they were not able to because it was no longer safe. Because we talk about these rolling wars and things that were going on. You've got Chief Buze that walked from Lofa all the way to the coast with his clan and was given refuge and given a place to stay. You've got King Peter. You've got a lot of examples of people being displaced from the what's considered what was considered the hinterland at the time, and seeking refuge within the settlement before 1847.
Yeah. So why was for this recapture slave? Why was Liberia picked? Why not Freetown?
Both places were. So you had two competing societies. You had the American Colonization Society, which was pretty much modeled off of the Sierra Leone Company, which was what was relocating people to Freetown. These were economic ventures. So if you received a certain number of recaptured Africans, defined again as the people who were being sold illegally into slavery along the coast. And the British warships would rescue those slaves and then pay. There was a monetary sum given to these societies, the Sierra Leone Company and also the American Colonization Society, Mississippi Colonization Society, Maryland, there were many, many different societies or colonization societies along the coast that were separate until 1835 when the Commonwealth of Liberia was created. But they would pay these colonization societies to take these people and not reincorporate them, but incorporate them, which would basically mean you are going to baptize them, you're going to teach them the ways of Western civilization, you're going to, they had to be Christian, they had to learn to speak English, and they would usually make them, work on various plantations, a lot of agriculture projects were going on. So they would give them work to do to sustain themselves. And they would, if they needed to teach them anything, they would teach them. So it was almost like a foster system, a foster care system for a lot of these people.
Now, coming to the idea, so as these people came, the criteria for becoming citizens, as we call them now, you must be Christian. You must maybe live in a settlement. What else?
So, I mean, that was pretty much it. You had to give up. So we talked about religion and how that makes people very uncomfortable with what they consider to be paganism or idolatry. So one of the requirements that was set forth was by a lot of the early settlers, especially if you're going to come into someone's home, is that you had to be clothed. And that you could not have, you couldn't do your idolatry. You could no longer practice your traditional religion. So there's these concepts, these women, traditionally our women did not find it to be offensive or vulgar to expose their breasts. That was not something that was vulgar. You hear Native women in those days saying, hey, excuse my language, but if God intended us to hide our breasts, he would have put them between our thighs. The reason the breasts are on the chest is because they're supposed to be visible. And because of the Western culture influence, that became vulgar. And also Islamic, some of the Islamic culture also wanted women to cover. But the interesting thing is Muslim women at this period in time sometimes did go without shirts on because they were essentially African. So it just, you had to just adapt. You could, they did not encourage people to be what they were used to being. And so this was problematic. It also meant that some people didn't want to be part of it. They didn't want to change who they were. They didn't see anything wrong with how they were living. You also had these very powerful kings, you had powerful Bandi kings, Madingo kings, Mono kings, Vi kings, who had very much a tight grip of power over their people. They didn't want to give up their kingdom to this group of, funny acting, westernized Africans on the coast. They wanted to maintain their status and their political autonomy. So they were not trying to lose citizens who were paying tribute and taxes to them, having them run away and attend these little mission schools and completely change their way of life. So you had many things going on before 1847. So I hope that answers your question. I did send you a picture show. I don't know if you received that. Did you get it?
Not yet. Let me bring up a few comments, even as we go along.
Sure.
Bobby Nancy, if Liberia was an asylum country, why was Michael Scavey denied? Any response?
Is that the only question?
The second question is a long one, so I want us to deal with this one. Okay, let me go to the second one.
Yeah.
Mr. Jai is a prejudiced person. Say Jay, but I think it means Jai. He keeps bringing this particular topic back to keep Liberia divided with the country and Congo settlement. What do you want to gain by airing this topic over and over when we already have it in our history? Jimmy is
Sorry,
not.
I'm not laughing at your question. I love the passion in which you read it. You know, it's like you're talking
Yeah,
about yourself and you're still reading it with a passion. I love that. Go ahead. That's very objective of you, Dennis.
you're right. We have to, because this is. I went to school in Liberia, and I was not to toot my own horn, very good student, right?
Hmm.
But we don't learn this in Liberia.
Yeah.
Okay, the first real history of Liberia that I learned was first year college at a university. So besides that, it was A. Doris Bank Henry's, right? So so I see where people are coming from when they start to ask these questions, because I ask the same questions too. And so I mean, you can, and being a host here, I've heard many things. So
Right.
it doesn't surprise me. Jimmy said, I heard Shelburne Island had two harsh conditions. Many mosquitoes, many people die, etc. That is why Freetown was not preferred. And Bobby, who talked about Garvey, said Marcus Garvey was the first black man to buy a ship called the Black Star Liner. But he and everybody else on that ship was not allowed entry by President Barclay.
Okay. So I'm gonna go, since there's two issues with Garvey. Garvey was not the first black man to own a ship. I mean, you had Paul Coffey, you had E.J. Roy, you had many, not many, but you had some other Africans before Garvey was even born, who owned ships and transported people. Even before ACS started transporting people, Paul Coffey was transporting African people before ACS was established, really, on his own ship. So that's actually not true. So Garvey was not the first to own a ship. And the other situation that Mr. Eastman brought up, Shelburne Island is not Freetown. Freetown was populated and settled long before Liberia was, not too long after the U.S. Revolutionary War. So Freetown was established in the 1700s, and it was repatriated Africans, and even later on recaptured Africans were being settled at Freetown. John Kizzleton was closer to Shelburne on the same coast, and Kizzleton was settled by a lot of repatriated Africans. So there were settlements all along the coast. Even when the Elizabeth landed, more than half of the people who survived that initial encounter refused to go forward to Cape Mesurado. So while it was harsh conditions, they decided to go on to Freetown. Some remained in Kizzleton, which is John Kizzle's settlement, and did not go on to Liberia. So everyone did not just get up, and go to Liberia with Eli Ayers and Stockton.
All right. And what about Nelson Freeman? You say this topic, you keep bringing it back because of Congo country divide.
I think it's good that we talk about it, Nelson. I think it's good that we dispel myths and we speak the truth. I don't think that history or information is something that should be buried. I don't know necessarily that Dennis is talking about Congo country. I think Dennis is more talking about there's groups of people. Liberians fall into general ethnic categories, and we should acknowledge these different ethnic backgrounds. I don't think there's a homogeneous group of people. In fact, not that I don't think, there isn't a homogeneous group of people called Native Liberians. I mean, the people that we try to group together and call Native Liberians are very diverse. And in some cases, extremely different. The experience that one group in a certain region would have had with the state is different from what another group would have had with the state, with the republic. So it's important to discuss that and just kind of clear up some myths.
Right. And it's important you said that about the diversity, right? Let's take Crew or Gribble, for instance. Gribble alone, you may have maybe up to 20 different groups. And we have Gribble in Maryland, you have Gribble in Grand Crew, you have Gribble in Sino, you have Gribble in River G. And all these people, they are subgroups, and their language is not completely the same.
Right.
They have variations. And there is a very small group of Gribble that come from Sino, and just one group. Unlike River G, for instance, I have maybe like 6 or 7.
Right.
Right. And someone was asking me, like political question. He said, I think, like, since the group from Grebo, the Grebo from Sano, just one people, I believe you guys, have it all good, right? Time for politics, you just put forward one candidate. And I told him that's far from the truth. It's still different. So
Right. Right.
the idea that there's a homogeneous native group or there's a homogeneous crew group or clan group, that is not true. People are different, people are diverse, and we should embrace it. That's who we are, and there's no need to hide from that.
Yes.
All right, that take us to the first citizens of the republic. Who are they?
So let's talk about this. And citizenship, meaning that you are a part of the country. Women were citizens even though they couldn't vote, right?
Your audio is having some issue here, so we're going to take a short break while
Okay.
you fix that. Let's take a short break. Welcome back. This is the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the first citizens of Liberia, and that is 1847 when it became a sovereign nation state. Carl?
Yes. So we're going to talk about this in a way that makes sense for people, because I think people get confused when they say, for example, well, the people in the hinterland were not citizens, so therefore native people were not citizens. I think that's usually the conclusion, the incorrect conclusion that's drawn. And so when Liberia became independent in 1847, there were 80,000, they said upwards of, which means probably more than 80,000 citizens. Of the 80,000 citizens, 7,000 of them were the direct descendants of enslaved African Americans. And there were recaptured Africans among that group as well. So who are the 80,000?
Or the 73,000?
No. So there were a total of about 87,000.
Oh, 87.
Right? 80,000 of them were indigenous Liberians who had been incorporated, along with recaptured Africans. And about 7,000 were the descendants of Africans from America.
Two things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when we hear that, okay, first, go ahead. Where were these people? These 80,000 people, where were they physically located?
So these were people on the coast, because you have to remember the Republic itself was really just a settled territory. And before they declared independence, these colonies, or the Commonwealth in Maryland didn't join until later, but they were all, created where there were other human beings living. So the people in on the coast, the coastal people, and within a few miles inward,
right,
would have all been incorporated into the Republic as citizens.
Right, because that coast, every county, right? Let's take Sino County for instance.
Yes,
it has what they call that time hinterland. Right?
Yes.
So along the coast, meaning, I don't know, do we know what how many miles from the coast these
So
people
it
settled?
wasn't really a uniform thing from one county to another. So, for example, in Monserrato, you're going far, far into the interior with Monserrato, right? Monserrato, you're going all the way up to Millsburg, where they built a Millsburg mission, way up the St. Paul River, almost into Lofa, really. So you've got all of those people. And meanwhile, in that same area, you still have autonomous people who did not want to participate in being Liberian. But from 1822 to 1847, one of the amazing things that was done that we don't really talk about, one of the amazing accomplishments, was the number of indigenous people who were educated, who were baptized and educated. At that time, there were two forms of education. Well, there were more than two forms of education. You had indigenous education too. But there were two forms of education recognized by the West, which was Anglophone Christian education and Islamic education. And of course, our indigenous people had their own education systems.
Yeah.
But so you had a lot of the people initially who were incorporated from the very beginning of the settlement. They were building schools. And a lot of those westernized, newly converted people were incorporated. You also have to remember that a good number of the people we consider to be Kru, or or Basa, or whatever we want to refer to them as today. That's not really who they were, but in modern times we call people Basa, we call people Kru, we call people Grebo. If you had said in 1790 to somebody, hey, you are a Kru man, they would have said, what are you talking about? Because they wouldn't have called themselves Kru. But a lot of those people on the coast had already been interacting with Westerners, had already, been Westernized anyway, before Liberia was established, especially in places like Greenville, and especially places like Harper and at Cape Mesurado, and at Cape Mount itself, you had settlements and populations of Europeans along those coasts for a very long time, since the 1700s, and even earlier interaction than that, but actual long-term settlements as early as the 1700s. So these people were not isolated. So they were more susceptible and welcoming of a Western-style state, and understood being incorporated in that state, what value came with it. Whereas people who were, for example, if you were a Muslim king living in what is now, Bopuru, what was then also Bopuru. If you were a Muslim king living in Bopuru, you didn't want to be bothered with this. You're not going to take your entire kingdom and say, yes, we're going to convert to Christianity, or we're going to I'm going to give up my throne and my power and go incorporate myself into this. So it wasn't even possible for the Liberian government to impose itself upon these people. So there was two things. They couldn't impose themselves, they didn't have the power or the force in 1847 to penetrate the interior and impose, statehood on people who already had their own countries, their own nations existing within the territory.
So again, those along the coast were, I believe, that was small, because even very late, before there was some penetration in the outward, in the interior of those coastal counties. So these people outside of Monrovia, I understand with Cape Mesurado or Mesurado County, outside of Monserrato County, along the coast in what is today Maryland, Sino, Baza, and later Cape Mount, the same criteria, these indigenous people met the criteria to become citizens, because I'm thinking, the 80,000, that's a big number, really. Where they came from and what were some of their rights? What could they do?
So in some of the other counties, like for example, Maryland, I always talk about these hard-headed Marylanders. I mean, Marylanders were not citizens of the whole county, including the African American repatriated people were not citizens of Liberia in 1847. They joined the Republic later. But Maryland, what's beautiful about Maryland is that they didn't have really separate settlements. Harper was Gribble. Harper was predominantly indigenous people. It always has been, before it was even settled. You know, that area was always a city. It was always a trading post. It was always a trade town. So people were already there. So when they came and they gave them a place to stay, it was right amongst them. So the people in Maryland, their experience is a little bit different because they were already intermingled and intertwined, because they were considered the people that were there in that area were already pretty westernized. They were pretty exposed to European culture. And the other thing that's important to note is a lot of those guys in places like Harper and Greenville, a lot of those crew boys used to jump on ships, work stuff. You know, when ships would come, they would say, "Hey, boss man, I want a job." They used to speak pidgin English. They used to speak broken Portuguese. They used to speak French. And they would ask for a job. "I want to go on your ship and go work." And they would travel. They would go with the ship. They'll go all the way to Liverpool. They'll go all the way to the Caribbean. They'll go to North America, and they will come back home. They'll come back home with things, you know, new coat. They will come back home and they will be bluffing everybody else in the town. Yeah. So this has been going on before Liberia was even established. There's multiple examples of crew, Grable, and our coastal people traveling on ships and returning home. And, you know, trying to show off that they've gone on this adventure. Young men found it very prestigious to be able to get on these ships and travel. So you're dealing with a culture that was already very, very much exposed and had been interacting with Europeans. You have to remember, before, most of the ancestors of the African Americans had even been sold into slavery. Right?
Right.
So if you're interacting,
that continued very lately, even up to the time I was born. I saw people in my hometown that had gone with the ship. That those days they were around, you know, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and they came back and I saw them. So it means that culture, the way working on this ship, you know, started long and it continued very late into my days.
Yeah, you know, it still happens. It still happens to this day. Yeah. If you go to Liberia Maritime Authority, it's predominant. I mean, the Liberia Marine Training Institute in Marshall is predominantly crew and Gribble boys. Predominantly, you know, it's like it's a generational thing. Maybe they heard stories of their great grandfathers going on adventures on ships. But these guys that are being trained to work on ships through Liberia Maritime Authority, they mostly come from those two ethnic groups. Not everyone, but the majority.
Right. In the early 80s, we used to sit and listen to Papa Wula tell stories of his days in Accra, in Sierra Leone, in Nigeria, and we just made fun of him when I told those stories.
I mean, I've heard stories from people who, as recently as the 60s, you know, would you know, try to get jobs and they would go down. Sometimes even the canoes that would just go back and forth from the ships, because there's no real harbor at the port. These port towns didn't have real harbors. So the ships would stay off in a distance so they wouldn't crash on these granite rocks. And the canoes would bring the goods and the human beings and whatever else they were trading back and forth. So even that exchange alone, you know, was exposure. Yeah. Not to mention the fact that we also had a number of Europeans who were living amongst us in these coastal towns. So it's not like that, you know, we forget that these are coastal towns and people settled there and set up businesses and shops there before Liberia was established. This is why when the people settled, there were a number of mulatto, as they used to call it in those days, but people who were half European, half African, living among the Africans, because there was a lot of interaction and people had children together. So long before 1822. So the idea, the concept that we have that somehow we were isolated, like we're, you know, somehow like we're Papua New Guinea or something. Liberia is not Papua New Guinea. Liberia is not some isolated place. The Grain Coast has always been a place for commerce and human interaction, both from the coast and through the interior, going towards the Sahel and across the desert as well. So we're not some isolated population of native people as we've been made to believe, and never were. This West Africa is not some remote island in the Pacific Ocean. It is at the center of the world. It was, it's not what people think.
So let's go back to this 80,000 indigenous Liberian citizens.
Mm-hmm.
What are the records of what they were able to accomplish, or what their participation in this new country was, and what rights they have, or they were just filling out the space?
So really what made people prestigious in this period in history was education. And so there were a lot of schools. And for people who were incorporated early on, they would go out of their way to make sure their children went to schools. And there were many schools along the coast, as you know. And as those people went to school, one of the things that happened, not always, but one of the things that happened is they would remove themselves from any connection with people who were not like themselves. And they found more of a kinship with the recaptured Africans or Congo people and descendants of African Americans than they did with people in the hinterlands.
And that has been the problem.
I don't know if it's a problem.
Because that's what people look at okay. And even till this day, right, the feeling that if you educated and become civilized, or kui as we call it, and then you erect this wall because you are no longer like them. So religion, you are now with Christians, the other people are idol worshippers, you are not educated, the other people are now country people. So that gradually erected that wall between what we know today as the civilized people and the country people, or the Congo people, American Liberians on one side, and right, indigenous and native Liberian on the other side.
Right, because to the indigenous people, anyone who was westernized was Congo.
Right.
Especially if you had a westernized name. They didn't, if I'm in Nimba, I'm not going to distinguish between Vice President Dosen and President Barclay. All of them Congo. And that's the other thing. A lot of Liberians don't realize we've had indigenous people, purely indigenous people, rise to the level of vice president in the country. And it's because nobody cares. Because they see him, he was educated, he wore Western clothes, and his name was Dosen. They don't care that his father was born into a Muslim family and along the St. Paul River and then converted, attended mission school, became an evangelist himself, was sent to Maryland to teach and to
we're losing you, Carl.
The sound?
Yeah, we're losing the sound again.
Yeah, sorry. People keep calling and I apologize. I'll use my...
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. This is the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia, brought to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. Well, we are discussing the first citizens of the Republic of Liberia, and as you can see, according to the presenter, we had 87,000 citizens of Liberia at the time of independence. 7,000 of those included the American Liberians and the recaptured Africans or Congo people, and 80,000 of those were indigenous Liberians, mainly along the coast. And one of the ways that these people were incorporated, we must be able to go to school or become, as they call it, civilized, be a Christian. And so even people that went to school, as soon as you go to school and become part of the settlement or become civilized, you take on a new name, and I like how, because, and I have an experience too of Christianity in my hometown, all the way behind God's holy back, right? Where when you are civilized, and this is how these things come up gradually, because when you are civilized, the way you are socialized now is you cannot or now mingle with people that are not civilized. So you have to join people that are civilized. You are now speaking English and you are,
So yeah, I think part of the confusion with the language, the verbiage that's used, is that the word civilized is misused
yeah,
in our culture, and they use civilized synonymously with westernized or being Christian,
correct.
and this is problematic because you don't have to be westernized to be civilized, and you don't have to be Christian to be civilized. So what they really used to say, if you read those books, I mean, they use this word civilized because in their Western minds, but if you think about it, our ancestors didn't think that they were correct either. Our ancestors thought their behavior was bizarre. They thought they were dirty. They thought they didn't bathe enough. They thought they were nasty for eating with both of their hands. So we every culture has rules of etiquette
Yeah.
that you must observe. And so if the indigenous people of the time, especially those who did not want to be incorporated, did not respect the conduct and the behavior of the people who came out of these mission schools. So human beings, look at things differently. Now, the concept that being westernized is the only way to be civilized, or that it's civilized at all, is clearly Europeans telling us this. And some of us, most of us, eventually buying into this.
Right, we got into that.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm getting off topic a little bit, but the Inland Church in Nimba, the Inland Church goes to Nimba, and they start telling people, because our people, we're Mende people, right? Mono, we eat cola. Yo, Christians don't eat cola. Christians don't, drink this leaf. Christians don't eat red oil.
Right. No,
And the whole country on Sunday, out of respect for Christ, will not eat red oil at a point in history. So this is not us. This is something we accepted as we converted.
Right.
And it's the same thing. A lot of the early converts to Christianity were also initially Muslim people that then were converted. It was sometimes a bit easier, unfortunately, to take the Muslim children and then convert them. And when it started happening too much, then the community started to realize, hey, our children are not coming back. They're going to these schools and they're changing. Case in point with the father of our vice president, Dosen, who was vice president from 1906 to 1912. His father was a native man, and so was his mother, and they converted to Christianity early on. Dosen's parents were among the first citizens of Liberia. And they were most likely Bai. Could have been Madingo, but they were most likely Bai people because of where his father was from, which is currently in Cape Mount, Grand Cape Mount County. So you have this Muslim Vai man taken into the Christian church as a child. He becomes Christian. So does his wife. He later marries, becomes a Christian. They're educated. They get married. They have children. His son grows up to be a vice president. Nobody cares that he's Bai. Nobody cares that Vice President Dosen is a native man because he's educated. So in the minds of the people who like to come up with this, they once you have changed your culture,
right,
you are no longer native person. I had someone argue with me that Angie Brooks was Americo Liberian. And this woman was just alive in our lifetimes, and she knew who she was.
Yeah.
But because her name was Angie Brooks, they want to argue that this woman was not who she was. She was Gola.
So, but the same thing happened here, right? You have even during slavery, right, where people that how they call them, they got a bad name for them here, and they thought that they were white, right, because the way they were socialized, and now they saw themselves different because they were in the house and the other people were in the field. Will you equate that to the same thing that was going on in Liberia?
Yeah, it was. I mean, and that's where the whole Basa Conga thing comes from and all of that kind of stuff. Most of those people are not the descendants of African Americans. Majority of them are just early incorporates. I mean, the same thing in Maryland. You've got, very highly educated Gribble people like Natisia Brownell and people like that. And it's like, or even Deedwo Twelve, who kept his name. These are people who were early on incorporated into the society, into the country. These were among the first citizens of Liberia. Their parents were in 1847. Their fathers, not their parents, their fathers were able to vote. Women could not vote anywhere in 1847, not in the United States, not anywhere. But indigenous men who were on the coast, so-called civilized indigenous people, could vote. They were among the first citizens, so-called civilized indigenous people. And they were the majority of the citizens, And that's something that when I started to realize this, and the more I started saying to myself, but why do Liberians not know this? This is all over the place. The evidence, the information is documented. It's clear, but for some reason there's a mind block. And even when it's like you're reading about Dosen, you're seeing the evidence. Oh, it doesn't matter, he was a Congo man. So we have to ask ourselves, what does that even mean anymore?
Right, because it's a social class now.
Yeah.
In my and these things continue. Christianity came to my hometown, deep in the interior, and what happened, which you can still see, those who were Christians. So the concept, and I was talking to a friend who also came from a mission in maybe northern or northwestern Liberia. Say the whole idea of a mission town existed only in the southeast. I don't know if that is true. That when the Christians come and they have a mission, so they're a separate place, and so those that get converted, they go and live in that mission town, and the rest of the people are on the other side. Because some of the conditions, like even in my town, people from my little area or from my family line did not live on the mission because, like for instance, they refused to adhere to some of the standards. If you have 3 wives, you have to divorce 2 and keep only the first one, and then you can be converted into Christianity. And,
or you have to give up your entire spiritual tradition.
Yeah,
you had to stop paying reverence to your ancestors. I mean, this was not a small thing. I mean, if you were a Muslim, you had to give up your religion. In a lot of times, you go on a mission school. These were Christian schools. They didn't allow the children to pray the way that they were taught to pray when they were born, and so they then were taught about Jesus, and they accepted Christ, and they were baptized, and then they didn't want to go back to their parents. They didn't want to go back because they were different now, and they felt that whatever their parents were doing was wrong. The same thing happened before Christianity came, when people converted to Islam. It wasn't acceptable any longer to be among people who didn't pray the way you do. Your daughter couldn't marry someone who didn't follow the religion. So this is a kind of acculturation that took place. And people, in our 21st century mind, we want to look back on the 19th century, look back at the 1800s and judge people. When in this modern era, how many of us would bring someone in our home to walk around without a shirt on? Would you not make them cover themselves? In this modern era, how many of us would allow someone to bring a shrine, a fetish shrine into their home with the hair and potentially bones and other objects from their belief system into your home? How many of us would allow this to happen today? So it's very easy to look and project this kind of arrogance and say, well, why didn't they do this? You have to remember, plenty of people didn't want to give up their cultures and join the Republic either. I always like to say we're not sitting around waiting for someone to give us a country.
We had a country, or we had a nation.
We had nations within what became the territory. And the coastal people were incorporated much earlier. There's a couple of good reasons for that, especially in the Southeast. The Southeast, the culture of the Southeast, we've talked about this in previous episodes. It was more clan-based. It was not as centralized. So people who are not in a highly stratified society, like the people who were living in places like what is now Lofa, right? Where you don't have this king that's in charge of all Grebo people. It never happened that way. Each clan had its own headman. So it's much easier to incorporate such people. But if you have a powerful king, like Mamalu in Bopuru, you cannot incorporate Mamalu's subjects into your republic. He will wage war against you. Because Mamalu's subjects are paying taxes or paying tribute to King Mamaru.
Right. And Cole, if you look today, I don't know, maybe we can have this for a different topic, is what happened that time. You can still see the way, people, even in today in Liberian politics, right? The way we all relate to government, to politics is different. People along the coast from the Southeast, Mile, they do this in a different way. And one example with this clan-based society is, if you had a presidential election now, maybe Sino County alone or Grand Cru alone can produce 5 presidential candidates. Because that loyalty to one group, people are separate. There's no centralized system, and that continues to today. The way loyalty or the way people hold together.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with what happened back then.
Exactly. So I put up this picture of this is CTO King. This is the father of President Charles D.B. King. This is one of the most incredible human beings. We should probably do a show just about CTO King. I believe from what I've researched, initially, when I scratched the surface, they claimed that he was born in Sierra Leone. Digging through the records in Sierra Leone, I believe he was not born in Sierra Leone. I believe he was actually born in Yoruba land. I believe he was born in what is modern day Nigeria, and was rescued as a very small child on a slave ship. And so the Dahomey Empire was just so evil. When they decided that they were going to sell the Gbado people into slavery, the Egba people into slavery, they meant it. They took your whole family, the children, the husband, everybody, and put them, in chains. And these people were being rolled off the coast. A lot of these people are incorrectly labeled as Igbo, but they were Egbo. Egbo is different, and they were Yoruba people. And so around this time period, you had massive amounts, because of Dahomey, of these people being shipped off. Even the last slave ships that were arriving in the United States. You talk about Igbo landing. I went to St. Simon Island, and they have a place called Igbo landing. I really believe that those were Egbo people because of the time period that it occurred and what was happening in Dahomey at the time. And it just doesn't, I don't think they were evil, but that's a different story. But this particular man, it was Ebo, not Igbo, and which is a subgroup of Yoruba. And Yoruba is a massive, massive empire. You're talking about one of the largest ethnic groups on the continent of Africa. So the early 19th century, the Abado Kingdom was raided for slaves by the Dahomians. They literally destroyed these people, decimated them, and the Dahomians sold masses of them into slavery, and many of them were settled in Sierra Leone and Liberia. The ones that were rescued and liberated before reaching the New World, and even some of those who reached the New World after being released through tribunal were also returned to Liberia. But in this particular case, CTO King was sent to Sierra Leone.
Right.
He was educated in a mission school, and then he got too big for Sierra Leone. Liberia was a country. Liberia had more liberty. Got too big for Sierra Leone. He decided he was going to go to Liberia and seek a life for himself, because Liberia, not Sierra Leone, was the asylum for African people. So he was ambitious. He wanted to go somewhere with his education that he could contribute to building, and this is in his own words, to building the future of Africa. This is someone that had gone through and experienced trauma. So he goes to Liberia. And he lives there. He starts doing little media jobs, but he's educated. He went to, remember I told you when these recaptured Africans came, they would baptize them and start sending them to school. So if you were a child coming off a slave ship, you were much more likely to be educated faster at a faster rate and adapt the culture faster. But he always spoke his language. He never lost his dialect. But we'll talk about him in great detail another time. But CTO King and many, many other descendants of the Abado Kingdom were among the first citizens, the earliest citizens of the Republic of Liberia.
And in Liberia, what we know of him is he came from Sierra Leone.
Yes, he did come through Sierra Leone. And like I said, when I scratched the surface, it claimed that his parents were the ones who came on the ship, and he was born in Sierra Leone. But I'm unearthing evidence that probably was less likely, that he probably came as a child, and he was most likely born in what is now Nigeria.
And his son, Charles David King.
Yes. So these are some children from the Day Mission, indigenous children in the late 1800s that were being incorporated. One thing that is very unique to Liberia that I have to point out that people take for granted is that the African American missionaries, most of the missionaries that were going to Liberia were Black at this time. People don't realize that. A lot of the white missionaries started coming in the 20th century. But initially, the idea, even from the very beginning, the very first ships that went to Liberia had African American missionaries on them. Some of them were very light-skinned, but they were African American. And so a lot of them were also women. The beauty here is what happened in Liberia that did not happen in a lot of other African countries, even after colonialism, is that girls were educated. Girls were educated. The French did not educate people the way Liberians did. The French colonialists, they would only educate the people they wanted to use to run their colony, which was males. And only a certain number of males, and they would usually select an ethnic group that they were going to work with. In this particular case, they were welcoming anyone and everyone that wanted to learn and because they were also missionaries. They wanted to baptize people. They wanted to win souls. So they did not really distinguish or discriminate against women. Many, many girls. Liberia had the highest percentage of literate women on the continent of Africa. Because even the Islamic schools, which were older, were not educating girls. Let that sink in for a minute.
Right. So, and that's how we got called.
Yeah, if I was around back then, hopefully. But I don't think I would have gone to this kind of school. I would have gone to my traditional school because I'm from God Clan in Nimba. So we didn't get a school in God Clan until the 1940s. So over 100 years later. So no, this was not going to be called. This is another, Native students at Day's Mission with some teachers. This is around between 1895 and 1900. These people are, again, Day Mission in Millsburg is, way up the St. Paul River. You're talking about being among the first, people that were incorporated. And this school is older than this. It's just that this is when photography was really available, right? So you had the school doing the same thing 20, 30 years earlier. So these are not the first students. This is just a pictorial representation of what was going on even earlier, because these kids, there were children that were being educated as early as the 1880s. Day Mission was established in the 1880s. And then many other schools were there as well, were all over the place. You had the Baptist school in Cape Mount. I mean, you had schools, literally, the Methodist school in Monrovia. You had schools all along the coast. Before independence and even more after independence. So this was part of the incorporation and acculturation, and in the changing. And really, if you think about it, if you read Edward Wilmot Blyden, if you read a lot of these guys, especially the missionaries, even Locke Carey, who didn't live very long after arriving at Cape Mesrado, their whole goal, Locke Carey went to Liberia for the sole purpose of educating recaptured Africans and indigenous Liberians. So many of the educated, repatriated African Americans, the purpose of their mission in Liberia was to do this, was to take indigenous people and incorporate them into Western culture and baptize them. So many of these people, these educators, these educated people that went to Liberia, these African Americans, their goal was to do mission work.
And what's up with these hats?
You know how people like hats, and there was that time period too. That was a thing. So I noticed, people get panicky. They're like, oh, the people weren't wearing shoes, but they had hats. Shoes were extremely expensive and difficult to come by. Even in the United States, if you look at pictures from this time period in Florida and Georgia, almost everybody's barefoot except if you're wealthy. Students were barefoot even in the United States, right, at this time period. In the northern states, you didn't really have that. You had to cover your feet because it was cold. But in the southern states here in the United States, a lot of people didn't have shoes in the late 1800s. So it wasn't unique to Liberia. It's just, some of the weirdness. This is a little bit small, but this is another picture from the Day Mission. This is from around 1880. This photograph was taken. Then we have, a little bit of a census data information about, I can post this later so people can see it better. There's another example of children, or so-called indigenous or native children that were being incorporated in the late 1800s, being educated. Now, what ends up happening is a lot of the descendants of these children don't realize, and I've gotten to understand this as I start to talk about some of the names of the people who were educated. Their children have either been told that they're African American, or maybe somebody just decided to just not tell them anything different. But a lot of people along that St. Paul River are Native people. A lot of people from that St. Paul River district who think they're Americo-Liberian descendants are Native people. It's very strange. And I don't know why, if you're Gola or you're Day and you become educated and Christian, why you wouldn't tell your children that they're Gola and Day. That's really strange to me. That didn't happen in Maryland. The people who got incorporated in Maryland early, they know they're Gribble people. The late Mary Burnell, Mom Mary Burnell, knew she was a Gribble woman. She wasn't confused about her identity. She wasn't confused about her father's origins, right? So it just depends on the region of the country. But like I said, Maryland was much more integrated.
Yeah, Maryland is different. The guy from one guy here with shoes, I believe, and the second from
yeah, that one he's probably some kind of big man's son,
right?
And the clothes that he's wearing too, it looks almost Islamic. Maybe he's just a big shirt. I'm not sure.
Right.
But a lot of these Muslim kings were extremely wealthy too, and sometimes because they wanted to have someone who they wanted to have someone who understood the how to write. They had Islamic schools. They knew how to read and write Arabic, but sometimes wanted their sons to learn how to read and write English.
Yeah.
So they would send their boys. Sometimes they would send their sons to these schools, and their sons would not come back. Their sons would not come back. Their sons would go, and then they would lose their sons to this new and foreign culture. So didn't take long for them to figure out that they probably shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
I mean, such was the case with Theophilus Gardner. His name was Mamadou Faika, right? He was a Vai man. His father was powerful and wealthy, and his father, said, "Oh, I'm going to send Faika to this school, let him learn how to read and write English. Then he could come and be interpreter for us. It will help us with trade and understanding things and negotiations, because my son, not only will he understand Arabic and, but you also understand this new language, this new way of writing." But what happened? Mamadou Faika goes to the school, changes his name to Theophilus Gardner, and becomes a bishop. Eventually becomes a bishop. He never goes home to his father. So this happened a lot.
Right.
This happened a lot. So we're still going through these pictures. This is another one. This is a very early picture from Day's Mission. This is one of the bridges across the river that they had. And it's just some people posing on the bridge. I just thought it was a very cool picture. Majority of the students at Day's Mission were Native children.
Yeah. Melenberg Mission.
Yeah.
And even as late as the 1960s, people were sent to school from the native people as a form of punishment.
Yeah.
And so the kings would not send their children to school.
Well, so initially they thought it was a good idea because they wanted the children to learn.
Right.
When they started to realize that their children would change and no longer respect their ways. So by the 20th century, you start to see resistance. Like, no, this school thing is not a good thing. We don't want our people to go to school. The girls go to school, they come back, they want to marry, the men again. They want to go marry the boys who went to school. This was becoming a problem. So there's a video, an interview that Bishop Arthur Kula did that was very interesting. He was talking about when his brother was assistant minister at Public Works.
Yeah.
So his brother, Minister Kula, who was a minister as in government minister, tried to carry the road. He tried to carry a road to their village. And all the elders got upset with him and wanted to resist this road because they said the road is going to expose the people and they will not respect them anymore.
Right. And mainly the women will leave. They will get on the car.
Bishop Kula didn't say it out. He just said that people will not respect them. He didn't. Bishop Kula ain't talking about woman business.
in most areas, the fear of the people was, if cars come here, the drivers, the car boys, and everybody will carry our women. Our women will get on the car and go. So that's
what Bishop Kula was more talking about was not about people leaving, but about what was coming in.
Yeah.
With the road, the kinds of information that would be coming to them, because for you to go and for someone to walk to that town from outside when it was a footpath, you had control, right? But if it's a road and people come in with car, with motorbike,
pop in, pop out,
there's no more control. You're going to see all kinds of people coming with all kinds of ideas and influencing. And now the people in the town are going to be infatuated with these people who are coming from Banga, really, right? They're coming from Banga. They're coming from the towns. They're coming from Ganta. And they're going to be influenced by these pseudo-westernized native people. And they're going to corrupt them. You know, I told the story on here before where my great-grandfather, you know, said, you people are neither stick nor rope. You're not civilized. You're not traditional people. You're just useless because you're not of this world. You're not of that world. So that's that whole limbo generation. And so things have changed, but we have to remember that the North Central Territory, where Bishop Kula is from, is not far from where my people are from. We had this experience much later. So there's living people who are witness to the resistance in the North and Central Territory, Nimba, Lofa, Bong, and Pokuru. But on the coast, you know, that process had been going on for a very, very long time. And I was joking with somebody, they were saying, oh, the Southeast is depopulated and there's not that many Grebo and Kru people. I said, yeah, because they all come up. I said, because y'all think you're not counting them because you think they're Congo. They've been educated for so many generations. You don't realize that you're interacting with the people that you think, you know, same thing with a day. You know, that most of the reason the day language is going partly because of the genocide of Gaitamba, but also because the day were incorporated.
Yeah.
Before the republic was established. And so many people we're looking for day people, but they're Congo.
Yeah, I just saw in my lifetime, I just saw one day.
You've probably seen many, many more. We're looking for the day people, but they're Congo. You know, it's funny. And that word Congo doesn't mean American Liberian. It never really has. It just means, you know, very westernized African is really what I think, because I mean, if you think about it, you had all of these representatives and senators from the inception of the country who were indigenous people, judges, educated people, teachers, professionals in private and public life, but they were not considered to be native because they were educated and westernized. So nobody looks at them to be what they actually were. So the only way you can be native is if, I guess, in their minds, is if you were not educated. Then the question comes, how could someone who couldn't read and write, how could that person rise to be president or vice president or representative? If Dido Otwe had been illiterate, how could he have been a representative? How would he have been elected? And at that time period, the indigenous citizens were not looking at the least among themselves to elect. They were looking at the most educated among themselves. So the mostly Kru population that was Congolized, the Congo Kru people, right, who elected Dido Otwe because he was smart, because he was educated, because he had gone abroad to go to school. They felt he was the best among them to represent them. They didn't feel they had to go elect someone who was fishing on a canoe to represent them, because they understood that to be a representative, you should be lettered, you should be exposed, you should be experienced to properly represent their needs. So people better understood government than it seems that we do now.
Are we sure was he really elected or just?
Yes, he was. There's records there. He was elected. I mean, they fought him and he was still elected. So this myth that there were no elections is not true, because there's records that they fought Dido Otwe when he ran for representative. He was still elected. They got up and gave speeches. They got up and gave speeches in the public. The stuff we do now is ridiculous compared. These guys understood. There's Dido Otwe's speech where he was trying to convince people to vote for him. Is a matter of public record. You don't get up and campaign and make speeches if nobody's going to vote for you, if there's no election.
Thank you. Where is this mission now? Oh, Marlenburg mission, where was that?
Up the St. Paul River.
Some of the Congo people.
Yeah.
The native helpers that they mentioned.
That was the caption. So helpers, I don't know what that means. If they were teachers, if they were, I don't know what they did.
Right.
But what I love about the late 1800s is even if you were working, as a gardener or whatever, you still put on your best clothes to go to work. Even if your job was to, man the ox cart, because they had ox carts, right? So you had the big cow, and then you see the wheel behind him there. That would have been pulled by an animal. And so even if your job was to sit and to hit the cow with the whip so that it could move forward like a horse, because they had used cows instead of horses, you were still dressed in your best clothes. You wouldn't go to work, sloppily. So they carried themselves respectably in that time period. And that was not just like that was even here in the States. If you look at people, even sharecroppers on a plantation, that would try to keep themselves clean and as proper as possible when they were doing their work.
Nicely dressed.
Mm-hmm. So this was captioned crew boys on the mission. So these are people from the coast that they brought on the mission, young boys, and basically had just brought them. So they hadn't yet been fully incorporated. So this is a photograph, and I did this last show to kind of show how the kids would come and then how they would leave, right? So these kids have come, they've probably learned how to play drum, they've probably learned all the beautiful traditions of their people. Now they're going to be, that is going to be removed from them. Now they're going to be told, Christians don't do this, Christians don't do that. Now they're going to be divorced of their traditional culture. And they're going to start to dress differently. They're not going to wear the loincloth any longer. They're going to wear trousers. They're going to wear shet. The charms and beads around them. And then when they grow up, they become men and they join the cabinet. They join the cabinet, and then they become become part of the machine. And so the beauty of Liberian history is that culture and ethnicity is fluid. I say this because it is. Ethnicity is fluid. And not only as far as somebody becoming a westernized, but even many people who consider themselves Madingo today, their ancestors may have been Roma or something else, and today, or Pele, and today they're Madingo. Ethnicity has always been fluid.
All right. We'll take a short break, and you can use that time to adjust your audio again.
Oh, I don't know. They keep calling me. I won't use my cell phone next week.
Put your phone on Do Not Disturb.
Yeah.
The call is 605-313-6004. The code is 791403. We're going to be right back. Keep your calls coming. Dial into the line. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Tanneh-Chewlae.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. My name is Tanneh-Chewlae, and of course, we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. We are discussing the first citizens of the Republic of Liberia. The number to call to join the conversation is on your screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791403 #. You can also keep your comments coming here. Let's read a few comments here as we wait for more callers to come in. All right. All right. Bobby Nash say thank you for the information. Jimmy Ismail, many people who did not even grow up during normal days harbor negative feelings about our differences. Hence, it is important to talk about it. I will say, what is the Declaration of Independence say in relation to who were considered citizens? All right.
So you want to go through all of them before I answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Houston Brooks say, always a great pleasure to soak up so much knowledge on Liberian history. Thanks, Team FOL. Jimmy Ismail, did the indigenous Liberian meet the citizens' criteria? I think we discussed that. There is a brother here. Elvis, did the native automatically gain citizenship by living amongst the settlers, or did they have to take an oath of loyalty? How was citizenship gained by the indigenous?
Good question.
Bobby Nash, I'm getting to see clearly now that Liberia default start and is continuing up to now as we speak. Default start. All right, there is a.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know. Default start. Houston Brooks, Angie Brooks was my grand-auntie. Her brother Uriah Brooks, my grandfather, was a well-known counselor at law in Monrovia during his day, with residence in Virginia. Oh, there's a Say Ali is talking about Mandingo. He said, you see, you didn't want to talk about the truth historical of the land called Liberia today. Mandingo people are the first native tribe of the land called Liberia today. I have a video for it. You're talking about 1889. Why are you not talking about 1880? Sally continued, this is my second time talking about this hidden history about Mandingo people. I have a video for it. If you're interested, please contact for the video. I want to get on this show, focus on Liberia to talk about the video. All right, and so on, and so on. Respond to the comments quickly, and then we go to our calls.
So citizenship, basically, if you were living in what was the old settlement, you were automatically a citizen, and you could vote if you were a man. If you were a man, so the descendants of American Liberian women could not vote, but if you were a crew or vi man and you were living in the settled part of Liberia, you were a citizen. You had the right to vote, where the women would not have had the right. But citizenship is not addressed by the Declaration of Independence. It is the Constitution of 1847 that grants citizenship, and the Constitution of 1847 does not deny citizenship to anyone based on their place of birth. The only requirement is that you were Black. And so citizenship was automatic if you were living within the Liberian settled territory. Now, those in the hinterlands who were not even known in 1847 were not, were citizens of their own nations and were under the Liberian territory, but the states did not have control over those areas. The Republic did not. What was the other question? I didn't understand that one.
Yeah, let's look. Soklo test. Basically, these kids, meaning the kids we show in school, were indoctrinated. Was there any effort made to return the children to their parents' home? Maybe after they were educated and became bishop or so?
I mean, yeah. Today, when people go to Monrovia, they don't even go to school. They just go to Monrovia as squatters. They don't want to go back to the village because they say that people will wish them, that people believe in witchcraft. I mean, just think about it.
Yeah. I have people who and I, we came from the village, we came from our town, Dodokan, all the way 1985. Since then, they have not been back. They are in Monrovia.
Yeah, because they believe they believe that somebody will wish them.
So people who went to school in the 19th century, I don't know if they were educated, if they want to go back, especially. But let's go to our calls now.
Some people did. Really quick, Dennis. Some people did. I mean, there were some, especially the older kids that they took on the missions. There's a well-documented case of a Madingo boy in Lofa who was on a mission. I mean, not Lofa. It would have been Millsburg mission. Decided that he was going to go back home. He left the mission. He told him he didn't want to be there, and he didn't want to change his religion. He didn't want to change who he was, and he went back to his people. And they talked about him in the most negative way in the Lutheran mission records. But I felt that that was incredible, because the fact that he had a right to resist and return to his family and say, hey, I don't see anything wrong with who I am.
Yeah.
I thought was important to note, even though they tried to make it look like it was a bad thing.
Yeah. All right, let's take some calls now. The first here is Houston Brooks. Houston, you're live. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, hello again, my good people. I tell you what, wow, man, I've learned more about the history of Liberia from this program than all my years of school in Liberia. But so I think I put my questions in the comment. Today, I want Madame Fambule to break this down again and make it clear, because she left me completely confused. Who is referred to as Congo people? I think I should already know who native people are, and the American Liberians. So if I understood her well, she said, well, people referred to as Congo people are native people that got educated, and then, they bestowed this term on them, calling them Congo people. All my days growing up in Liberia, I was referring, you Congo man, you this. So I'm confused. I don't know, how do we call descendants? How do we call descendants of the settlers that came from the United States?
American Liberians.
Yeah. So basically, along those lines, that's my question. I'm confused. I don't know who's Congo people, who's native people, and what else.
This is a good question. You want me to wait for all the questions? Or
yeah, go ahead. You can answer them.
Okay. I think the whole population is confused. That's what I think. I think the whole country is confused. So the majority of people we call Congo, what we do is we group all the and it depends on who you talk to, but let's talk about the majority of the population. We group all of the educated, privileged class together into one group, westernized class together. Christian, educated, westernized Black people, westernized Africans, we call all of them Congo. Whether they be the descendants of African Americans, or whether they be the descendants of recaptured Africans, which is a much larger group than the descendants of the African Americans, the people in the category of the Egbo from the Dahomey conquest, those people that came from the Congo Basin and Nigeria and Benin area, we call them, which is where the word Congo comes from, but we call them, and the even bigger population, which is the indigenous Liberians who became westernized and Christianized very early on. So not in our lifetimes, back in the 1800s, very early on. Their descendants, we just put everybody together and call them Congo. And in some places, like in Bassa, we just use the term Congo Bassa, and people think it's because that these people are mixed with American Liberian. No, majority of those people are just Bassa people who were Christianized early on and westernized early on, and they took on the culture. And so when I say ethnicity is fluid, that group of people that we call Congo has become a class and a culture unto itself. Right. So I hope that answers your question.
But originally, that name referred to the recaptured Africans, those captured along the Congo Basin. And
yes.
But
in modern times, we just call everybody.
Yeah, we use that now. And then those descendants of free slaves from America, or the American Liberians, those recaptured were the Congo. But as time goes by, we mix everything become even just like a.
And in fact, they weren't even calling them American Liberians; they were just calling them Liberians. I mean, it's just the whole world. We have to anyway.
Let me bring on Jimmy Ismond. Jimmy, you're live.
Yes, John, how well do you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, very good. Carl, again, I have to commend you on your extensive and continuous research. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you bring so much to the table.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first borders on something similar to what Mr. Brooks was asking. I believe the way we identify ourselves is very important because that is our orientation. I hated that Congo word. I never liked it. It's simply because it's a broad brush that doesn't really define who anybody is. I used to think until tonight that civilized was better because it was absent of ethnic connotation. But until you define how civilized implied a adherence to Western civilization. So I think how do we identify ourselves so we can have the right, proper orientation? But the second question is I'd like to read an excerpt for you so you can comment on. They say King, talking about C.D.B. King had also met the representatives of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association and encouraged black migration to Liberia. He later realized that the group's intention was to establish black colonies in Liberia. He deported their representatives and made it known that he was the president of Liberia, not the black race. He was building his country and promoting nationalism and was in no way interested in racialism. His reaction to the UNIA was lauded by the African colonial powers and other Europeans. In other words, he played what they wanted him to do. So my question is, I thought Garvey, being as industrious as he was, would have been a good thing to come to Liberia. But there's so much conflict, and here is CDP being quoted. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. And I'll take
my first question is, who is quoting him?
Excuse me?
Who is quoting Charles D.B. King? What's the source of the quote?
The source of this information?
Yes.
It's from Liberian Info, informing and educating, and then that's the web base that I got it from.
Okay, it doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry, Jimmy. Whoever is saying that, I don't believe. I don't believe. Yeah, I don't attribute that quote to Charles D.B. King. Charles D.B. King was many things, but he wasn't an idiot. And that statement saying that he's the president of Liberia and how he doesn't buy into racialism is absurd. When Charles D.B. King was president of Liberia, Liberia was and still is an asylum for African people. There's no way Charles D.B. King would have made that statement that I would accept, except someone recorded him saying it. I've studied this Garvey phenomenon thoroughly. I hope to do a show on Garvey/Liberia and the connection soon. But my comment to that quote is that I don't believe that King said that. I do know that King had to play two-faced with the U.S. government, and he had to walk a fine line. And we kind of talked about, cowardice, and maybe he didn't show the courage that he should have shown. But I do not believe at any time, I've read many of his speeches, enough to get in his head and know that he understood what Liberia was. And for him to say that he didn't want to get into racialism, or he wasn't the president of Africa, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It contradicts everything else the man stood for.
Okay, let me bring in Aliyu Kamara. Aliyu, you're live. Go ahead, sir.
I hope my sister when I'm found around today.
We'll fight again. Anyway, I'm just kidding.
Anyway, look. Somebody wrote and said you were bringing some sort of divide and XYZ. No. I think this show, FOL, this particular show, creates the corridor for these discussions. I learn every day, in as much I really do disagree with Kowu analysis for most of the things, because she has a certain level of admiration
for the settlers' rules at the rule at the time. And so sometimes the way she does her research, I think there's some bias in the way she does her research. But the positive side of it is that whenever she comes on the show, she gives them a reason to begin to do research, even as she's speaking. You know what I'm saying? So the condition of this show is all positive if you look at it. One of the things that I have to really understand is when people say that these settlers, when the settlers went back over there, they were more interested in independence. They wanted to be independent. They wanted to establish a rule, their own of self-governance. But at the same time, they were imposing Christianity that enslaved them. Now they made it a doctrine for themselves. Now Christianity belonged to them. These are the people who would change African names to their slave masters' name. And somebody tells me that these people really wanted to be independent. Go down Monrovia, Carey Street, Broad Street, Ken Johnson Road, Johnson Street. Are you telling me that these are people who really wanted to be independent? So the Congo man, and I like to call it Congo not because there's a race called Congo. Congo is a way of life, like she said. You know, the way you carry yourself, we put you in that category because that's how we saw them do things. But there's no such thing as an actual Congo man today. And everybody got some kind of indigenous, you know, like she said, she's just a very smart thing. Like for example, Ellie Salib. I was growing up until I was probably in my late 30s. I knew that Ellie was a Congo woman. Come to find out, no more than Kruger. She has no Congo in her family. You understand? So she was right about that. So again, it's just a way of life, the way you carry yourself, the kind of group of people you associate with, you're Congo. It's just that simple. So anybody who says that this show is bringing problems, Kowe is doing a great job giving some of us dull people reason to actually go and check for a society, about a society that we were born and raised in, and didn't take too much time to learn about. So she's actually forcing us to educate ourselves and get some information from her as well. So thank you guys for the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aliyu. So I want to respond to Aliyu very carefully because last time I picked fuss on my brother. But Aliyu, what's the origin of your name? I mean, we had Muslim kings that carried the names of their conquerors and the religion of their conquerors and imposed them upon people using the scorched earth method, massacred people in order to convert, especially recently with Samori Toure. Most of the people that consider themselves Muslim in Liberia today, they became Muslim through conquest and through an imposition that their ancestors resisted and lost to for the most part. It's not a monolith. Of course, there's people who willfully and willingly converted. But as recently as the Samori Toure Wosulu Empire, if you did not join and become a Muslim, you were an enemy. So to say that you don't understand why African Christians would open schools and educate other Africans who were, as some would call kafirs or heathens, right, into becoming Christian, it is analogous to what happened for the prior 200 years with Islam. In fact, not even 200, 800 years if you're going to consider, the entire region. So I don't want you guys to look at when I look at history, you said I have an admiration for the settlers. I have an admiration for African people, period. And so when I speak of American Liberians or the repatriated Africans, when I speak of Samori Toure, I speak of these people with the same reverence. These are my people. I don't look at history and put myself as in an us versus them. These are things that happened. And I try very hard when I'm presenting to suspend judgment. But when I hear an intelligent person who carries a name like Aliyu, we have cities that were in Liberia named Mecca, and you're saying that these people have Camp Johnson Road, how many Arabic schools were here? And how many Arabic schools still exist? These Abrahamian religions are not African. It is the same conquest. The slave trade began across the Sahara, not the Atlantic. It was Muslim invaders that destroyed our empires and made it even possible for Europeans to conquer us. So when we talk about history, it should no longer be an us versus them.
Yeah.
Because the history that Africa has with Islam is much longer, and the subjugation of Africans under Islam is much older.
Right. And called being a Christian myself, there is no Christian who accepts Christianity or who follow the teaching of Jesus and believe that those who enslave them are actual Christians. So you have this conviction. And that's why the people even survived slavery when they were Christians, right? Because when they were even in the slave camps and they were reading the Bible, and the Bible is telling them, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptation. God is training you. So they came out feeling closer to Jesus and not to slave masters. So it is very common for them to go on and propagate Christianity, not from the standpoint of the slave masters, but from the standpoint of the Bible they read and understood. Right. And that's what they were doing. So you wouldn't expect them to say, okay, because my slave master was wicked, I'm no longer a Christian. These people were not following the slave master, they were following Jesus. And so they felt convicted to be able to, as we in Christianity say, win more souls. And why wouldn't they?
Right.
Let's take our next caller here. Will be Evans Morris. Evans, you've been waiting for 21 minutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I didn't know, Mr. John. Thank you. Thanks to Mrs. Family tonight for the show, but I have some critical points to make. I think it was the last show that she was on when she talked about the Declaration of Independence. And I think one of the clauses in that declaration was that those who settled on the land was considered the citizens of the land that was declaring independence. So I don't think they mentioned anything about the people who were settled amongst them, the quote unquote indigenous people.
Wait, can you say that again? I didn't catch
it. Say that again. I missed that. You said the Declaration of Independence is what?
In the last show that we had, right? I think there was a clause. If I remember, I can look it up. But it said that when they were declaring independence,
it said we the people of.
Let me finish this. Let me understand what you're trying to ask.
United States. Is that what you're referring
to? Yeah, that's originating from the United States, right?
Right.
And the notice didn't originate from the United States, right? So that was that excluded them from that Declaration of Independence, right? Fine.
No, it doesn't actually. But I'll answer you when you're done. And I addressed that last week. Right. I don't know why you're asking it again.
Yeah, so what's the question?
Right. And then I got a couple comments to make, and then I'll ask my question at the end.
Okay.
And then second, when Ms. Famila said that these people, they didn't want people coming into the house with no clothes, with no shirt on or bringing shrines. And are these, like my friend Carla Genesis would say, these are Negro pants, right? Because if you're an African person and you come back on the continent, you want to regain your Africanness, you don't see those things to be quote unquote uncivilized, because those are what African people have been doing for centuries. That's part of their culture.
Right.
That's part of who they are. So if you come in and you bring in this, quote unquote European religion, and you try to impose it on the Africans, no nation is homogeneous. You have different religions. You have people who are traditionalists. You have people who practice Islam and so forth. So by them trying to force this, like Ali said, if they're trying to make you to be Christianized first before you can be accepted into their midst, to be educated first before you can be accepted into their midst. For me, for my ancestral home of Grandview, we didn't become a county, I think until the 60s. I think the same thing with Nimba. So do we then consider ourselves, were we Liberians before we became a county, or did we become a Liberians after, Grandview, Nimba, and I think another, one or two other counties.
They were provinces.
Part of Liberia.
There were provinces before there were counties. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the citizenship of our people occurred in the 20th century. Our people were incorporated in the 20th century. This show is not about us. It's not about, well, some people from our area that had migrated, but for the most part, the show is not about people in the North and Central Territories, which have become the counties of Lofa, Nimba, Bong, Grangita, etc., River G.
So 1847 or Evans, you were not a citizen.
No.
Liberia.
Right.
So here's my thing, Elvis.
My last comment I want to make before I get off the line is
right, and let's be brief now. We have 7 minutes to close.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. My last comment would just be that we have not every lived experience is documented in a history book. So people who live certain experiences, then that they can go back and tell you how they were treated, how they were ill treated. Those will not be documented for Ms. Cole or somebody like me to go and read about it and say, okay, so and so did, this person was discriminated against, or this group of people was marginalized. But these things happen in quote unquote contemporary Liberia from the 60s,
of course,
coming to the 80s. So I don't want us to make this seem like, because every time when I make this point, everybody seems like I'm lying or these things never happen, and I'm just bringing up some kind of bitterness towards the ruling class. So I just want to make that last point before I get off the line, but I'll take my answer to the line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elvis. So the idea that if you were going to be we talked about the Wosulu Empire from Mauritania. The idea that if you're going to be part of the Wosulu Empire, if you were not Muslim, you could not have any rank or anything like that. I mean, this is the case with any religious group. You don't want religion in and of itself, just by defining what it is. Religious clerics don't like the idea of mixing, Islam or Christianity with traditional African beliefs. And you're talking about people are going back to Africa and they did not want to accept the things that were going on. I mean, Elvis, seriously, very few of us that are even from Grangita, Nimba, and places like that. Very few of us are going to want somebody coming into our home. Now, I'm not saying it's me. I don't share my belief system on it's my personal business, but many people would not want people practicing traditional African religion. They call it witchcraft. A lot of Native people who've never left Liberia, a lot of Native people who can't read and write, fight indigenous religion. Most of our cotton trees have been chopped down recently by indigenous people who are saying that these are ancient shrines and they're evil. We need to chop them down. That's the kind of stuff that's going on today when we so-called have a native government. So it's hypocrisy to sit here and judge people who lived 150, 175 years ago for doing things that are not even as extreme as what we're doing today. The other idea about the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence is not a citizenship document. The Constitution is. Hillary Teague wrote the Declaration of Independence. What Hillary Teague was saying is we are establishing this country and these are the reasons why. The indisputable fact is the modern state, the Republic of Liberia, was absolutely established by the descendants of enslaved people from the Americas. That does not mean that it was not established for, which he goes on to say, it is an asylum for all people of Africa. He did not stop there. He's saying we came from America to establish this place as an asylum for all of us. The second portion of that declaration is what people like to neglect because they want to demonize these people in the past. It's absurd. So he was supposed to say, we didn't come from America. It wasn't people who came from Grangita who established the modern state. It's a fact of history. It was repatriated, formerly enslaved people who established the modern state and declared it independent. This is a fact.
Thank you. Let me bring in two last callers here. The first is Tanneh-Chewlae, calling from Fargo, and also a Citizenship. Teddy, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Brother John, for taking my call. Anyway, to the audience, I'm Teddy Lion Yakun, calling from Fargo, North Dakota, chairman for operations for CDC USA, North Dakota chapter. Well, interesting.
Do you endorse the beating of
Hey, Dennis, don't turn my show into politics. I beg you, don't do that.
You say if I enjoy the beating,
go ahead with the question. I was just kidding.
Anyway, that country needs to be protected.
Go ahead with your question.
One or two gentlemen, mentions how they feel about, presentation. I feel the similar ways of that, she's always present. Sometimes I may defer to her, some way of a presentation when it comes to the crew dynamics. But, indeed, she's a very smart, educated woman, beautiful, and she knows how to, eloquent, sometimes she gives you the challenge, for you to also go and make some research to educate yourself more. Historically, when she was talking about when each time they go to in the southeast region, like among the crew people place, like everybody mostly put it on it, they already now been a Congo people. Sometimes a little bit, different to that because
you said
I didn't understand what he said the last thing.
She said the people in the southeast are Congo people. I didn't get that.
Yeah, she said most of the people in the southeast have been captured or turned to because of the Western culture. So you don't find it again. You find Congo people, something like that.
I was being sarcastic.
Yeah, but I just wanted to make it clear to the rest of the audience that when it comes to the crew people, it may have been like insult to the crew people because crew people are one people who never accepted that term Congo because even because for them to take their own life, they'll take their own life, but they never like that term Congo. They are crew. They either could have said civilized crew, some people say, sacred P, things like that. But they never like Congo. Even the whole Congo business.
She was joking, Teddy.
Yeah,
so the civilized crew, Teddy, the civilized crew, the Congo Bassa, on a serious note, the civilized crew, the Congo Bassa, they're all the same thing.
The crew dynamics is very complex and kind of strong with the native, also with the Westerner. It goes very deep, way back, centuries back.
Yes.
You see, our Mali in West Africa before there was a leadership in West Africa. And, so the residue of those leadership led to that whole Timbuktu stuff and in Timbuktu to Geneva, they had one of the Timbuktu University, and the replication of Timbuktu University in Spain. So that was the first university in Europe. That was black people, beginning of black people civilizing white people.
Okay, so but that's not cloud history. That's not cloud history.
Yeah, Teddy, make your point to what we're discussing.
You can talk about cloud history, but you're bringing in the history of. You're talking about Moors. You're talking about northern Muslim Africans.
Yeah, so that's Salamanca University.
So you're what? I'm confused. Are you saying that the cloud people were Muslim in ancient times?
White people get a land. Yeah, to educate folks. So black people, as well as the crew people, were once in England, Russia.
Okay.
And then after the fall of black civilization in Europe, those were the very first black people that started enslaving. The British slaves. They took some of them to Jamaica, to this place, the Caribbean. That's not based in any fact though.
Where are you getting that? You're confusing a lot of things here.
So they knew about those people and the descendants of those folks, and they told their children that they were connected with the Kwa people. So
okay, so a lot of the crew people around the world will have a show on the crew.
Teddy, I know your interest in the crew history. Can you speak to tonight's topic so that
Wait,
we have
Dennis, hold on one second, please.
we
Because
need-
for the integrity of the show, for the
Yeah.
integrity of the show, listen,
Where the Congo did the term.
listen, can I please
All right,
stop?
because
Teddy,
we are almost out of time.
Teddy, for the integrity of the show, when you call in and you're going to be making these statements, it's fine, but you should realize that there's kids watching these shows. There's children watching these shows, Dennis. So we have to be careful when we're presenting information to cite sources.
So that's how you find a lot of our folks in Maryland, but there are people who were once crew before, but then they were already westernized, but they decided went back to Africa.
Where are you getting this information from?
All right. Okay, Teddy.
So Dennis, I would love to do a show on the coastal crew people. I'll do that one day, but this is not history.
They were not traditional people before.
Thank you.
This is no longer history. Now we're just making up stuff.
Let me take my last caller here, and that's Ayume Cassell. Ayume, your live.
Yeah, hello, everybody.
Hi,
Thank
Ayume.
you, Dennis, and call my Kendrian sister. Thank you. My respect. You see, when you do these shows, I can be listening to the callers. There is one principle to healing, and that principle is faith. Whether you get it faith from whatever way you get it, that one principle is faith. So whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, that principle of healing ourselves, totally or in religion, whatever religion. But people's minds are already made up that it happened this way. And this is the blocking stone for us learning our real history. We're looking for self-importance. I want to tell people to be the best. I want the grown people to be the best. I want them to come from that land that they were. That is not what history is about. History is about our wrongs, our rights, and that make us beautiful through those things. I'm just asking my Liberian people, just for a minute, open your mind and forget what Grandpa said, and forget what your auntie said on Cherry Street. Let's look at these facts that are before us. Let's look at these primary sources that are before us. And then put ourselves in the minds of the people back then. And we will become to understand where we're coming from so that we can come together. But a lot of callers I heard is still the segregation. We can't just be sitting, Congo people this, Congo people that, Congo. How many people came on this ship so much that we made them there?
That's the whole thing. How many people?
Yes.
Well, that's for ourselves.
That's what I'm trying to say. Let's open our minds. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's that will be our last caller here. Call your response and then we can conclude.
Yes, AMA, you're correct. We have to. So part of the process of my studies, I've been doing this literally my entire life. You know, I started researching not only Liberian history, but African world history in general when I was about 12 years old. And it's a long story about why. I'm not going to get into that. But things that I believed and I learned, I initially, and the deeper I go, and you have to look at evidence. So history is a study of evidence. And you look at documents, you look at things, and then you connect that to world events. History is not propaganda. It should not be propaganda. History is not rumors. History is not folklore and confusion. It is evidence-based, documented evidence-based, recorded events. It's also a study of anthropology. It's also a study of human migration. It's a study of geography. It's a study of so many things. History is all-encompassing. So when somebody comes on and says things like, we can't discount what people experienced firsthand. and we're talking about 1847, and we are living in 2022. There is no firsthand account that isn't documented because everyone is dead. And you cannot project that because you got bullied in school for having a strong Kron accent or strong Geo accent, and you want to project that on people who lived 175 years ago. It doesn't make any sense. Or the propaganda that followed the coup that tries to hold on to the justification for the coup, the lies they told. The lies that they told that our people never held positions of power, never went to school. Tanneh-Chewlae was a representative. He kept his crew name and he was elected to office. He ran for president. These are the lies that don't hold up when put against documented facts. Tanneh-Chewlae was a literate man. He wrote. While he did not like westernized African people, he himself, in a lot of ways, was westernized as much as he tried to cling to his culture. So when we talk about our history, in order to fit this lie, this inconsistent lie, this terrible story that we've painted ourselves as indigenous people as some kind of useless savages that a handful of people came and conquered, you're diminishing yourself and your ancestors. You're erasing people like Netisie Bernal and Tanneh-Chewlae and Wollo and all of these people. You're erasing them in order to uphold your narrative. Why? Why is it difficult to accept the fact that a lot of our people became westernized and turned against those who were not? Why is it difficult for us to accept the fact that Christians came to the land and behaved exactly the way the Muslims who came before them behaved? Why is that difficult to accept? I was shocked when Aliyu was talking today and talking about Christians using the names of their conquerors and imposing the religion of their conquerors. I was shocked. Religion is a choice, but we have to also know that it has not always been this way. That many of us identify as one religion or another simply because of conquest. This is why history is important. It doesn't mean you're wrong to practice one religion or another. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but you must understand that it was introduced, both religions, Abrahamian religions were introduced to Africans through conquest. We have to learn, we have to unlearn in order to learn. And that has been the process. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you all for calling. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you so much. We have a great lineup tomorrow. 1 o'clock, we have discrimination faced by members of the Fulani community in Liberia, according to Hassan Gassem Jallo, and he's going to use himself as a case study. You don't want to miss that. That comes on tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Then at 3 p.m., we're going to have a scholarly discussion on a monthly scholar series. Dr. Rob Tanneh-Chewlae will be the guest of Dr. K. Moses Nawe and Jackie Sayer on the Literary Hour. You don't want to miss that. Then at 6 o'clock, I'm going to be hosting Gospel Artist Ambassador Fatu Zion. Watch Focus on Liberia almost every day. This is where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Cole, I want to thank you tonight for a beautiful show. We want to thank our viewers for always watching right here. Focus on Liberia. Continue to follow us. Liberian history, as you never heard before, is right here. Until then, we're going to close tonight with our song that says, whether you are American Liberian, native Liberian, or dual citizen, Congo, or Muslim, Christian, we are all Liberians. And that's the message we're going to leave you with this song. We are all
No.
Liberians.
Wait.
Welcome.
She doesn't need to be on the show.
Good night and
Good night, everybody. Hi, Sue.
We all Liberians.